right. Hey, everyone. Um, Today we're going to discuss a couple of things. First of all, the model Elvin Like Me, Other Can Come Out of the Closet by Nick Mamatis. Again, if you have not read this, just stop the video, go back, read it, and resume here so that we can talk about it. Again, we're not going to read through the whole thing because you've read it, but there are certain things I want you to pay attention to and maybe apply to your writing. See if it works, see if it doesn't. Again, we're just trying to find models and templates. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to most of the models I wanted to use for an ethnography, so this will be the last one of the semester. So really pay attention to this. Also, go back to this reading from a couple weeks ago, writing an ethnographic essay, because now, after you've read a couple of the models, you may want to review that so that those things are a little more, those ideas are a little more concrete to you. Okay, let's begin discussing. Okay, first, let me remind you here. I'm sorry. That your papers are due this coming Monday, which will be April the 27th, on Monday by midnight, online on Canvas. That link will be live once you see this video, probably, um, depending on when you watch this video. Um, Thanks for a lot of interesting questions on the discussion board. Um, it's gone relatively well. Uh, there's been some there's been a lot of pretty good uh, ideas brought up there, and I hope that that helps. Also, if you do feel you need peer review for this paper, which it is the final paper in here, Project 3, try to maybe exchange with someone in your class via email. Uh, Maybe ask on the discussion board, maybe just email someone. Believe me, people are usually very receptive to that and really want to see what the heck they're doing and what the heck you're doing so that maybe you can collaborate a bit. We don't have time to do this in class because we don't have a classroom. Okay, so let's start talking about Elvin Like Me, Other Can Come Out of the Closet by Nick Mamatis. I'm going to leave the title up to you. Figure out if it seems like a good hook to you or not. Was it interesting? Did it make you want to read? Um, Again, notice how it begins with Magpie Hofstrandotter, however you might say her name. I apologize to her. It is the use of a character again. So we can see that ethnographies, since they're about a group of people, would obviously rely a lot on some of those people. So using characters is just as important now as it is uh, for an argumentative essay and for a personal narrative. I want you to look at the second paragraph. In college, she discovered the internet and found a community of people. I'll tell you what this is. What do you think it might be? It is Magpie's backstory. We get a little bit. Notice it's only it's two sentences about where she came from and how she became an otherkin. Where it started. It says she discovered the internet and found a community of people. Right there, the author's saying a community of people, letting us know that's what this is going to be about. It's an ethnography about a group of people. So it goes back and talks about where she came from. Don't be scared of doing that in your own papers in referencing your own characters. Um, Notice this is a very important point here. Um, the third paragraph, which is just one sentence that says their otherkin and they're trying to get back home. This is starting to hint toward Nick Mamatis's angle, and what he is trying to say about the people, the group of people. They're trying to get back home is a little vague, and you'll notice that he'll get more specific as the paper goes on. An interesting technique. This means that as your ethnographies are going forward, you can see that you can put a more clarified version or statement of your angle or thesis. Um, So notice that the fourth paragraph is pretty much just the one that begins once they believe humans and elves and trolls. That's pretty much just pure information on what they think. What does a group think is not something we've talked about much, but how do these people think in their heads generally? Does a group of people uh, consider Quidditch to be the most important sport ever invented in the real world or the fictional world at large? What do they think? If they say that, if they think that, please put that in. If you've observed and analyzed that, put that in your paper. Um, but importantly is the part that's underlined in that paragraph that says, but like so many other marginal subcultures, the otherkin have found a place on the internet where they swap stories, make friends, and build communities. That sentence is doing a lot, and it's something you need to do in your papers. It's saying where they currently act, the internet. It's important. Some places might act physically in another area. The otherkin have found a place on the internet. And then what do they do there? Well, it says they swap stories, they make friends, and they build communities. So tell me, where do these people in your group, where do they function, and what do they do in that functionality? If Quidditch players play Quidditch on the pitch at Tulane, almost sounded like a riddle, then what do they do there? Do they yell at each other? Or that would show that they're mad. Do they laugh and joke the whole time? That would show they might not take it as seriously. What they do, action details, like in every other paper we have written, shows their general idea, what you view and what you analyze from that information. So notice they Nick Mamatis started with Magpie as a character. By the next paragraph that starts, as kids, many say they felt out of place in this world. Notice that expansion. That is a little technique he has used. As kids, many say, so just by using those two words, many say, all of a sudden we're not just in Magpie's mind. She'll pop back up as the piece goes on, as you know, because you've read it, but it kind of expands there. As kids, many say they felt out of place in this world. It shows a little bit of history and it expands the focus. So now we realize, okay, this isn't a profile on Magpie, the first character we see. It's a study on a group of people. Again, that's the essence of an ethnography and something that is often forgotten because I emphasize character so much. I don't want you to think that this is about a single character. You use a character to expand to a more global point. It's the typical to global meaning that we've talked about many times. Why are we talking about Magpie? Not just to let you know about Magpie, like a profile, but to let you know about the substance of the group of people she is involved with. In this case, the otherkin. Um, then it says Magpie, for one, runs the Otherkin Resource Center at www.otherwonders.com/otherkin. Again, that just shows you where they congregate. Here they are on the internet. It's still not just talking about Magpie. It's talking about where this group at large works. Um, the next paragraph said, others found their way to the fold through New Age style trance work, dreams, and even role playing games. Think Tolkien, not Keebler, etc., etc. You'll see in the middle of that paragraph, we have a different character. Arwhain is how I would pronounce that. A 34-year-old British elf claims to heal more quickly, etc., etc. And then notice what's in the middle of that paragraph: dialogue. I was still showing my ID in liquor stores at the age of 32. You can read that for yourself right there. But dialogue does a lot. And it's now putting a voice to another character. How do we get this voice? Usually through interviews. I know that that's more difficult at this point in time. Maybe you have found a way to talk to them through the internet. Maybe you have found a way to talk to somebody in your family. Maybe you have found a way to email somebody. Or maybe you've just seen people speak through videos on the internet. All valid ways, or in writings, all valid ways of getting information, as long as you can capture the voice and the words someone from that group says is completely fair. Um, yes, use dialogue. But notice here, Magpie. The piece starts off with Magpie, who is in Chicago. Where's Chicago? It's a very specific place in the United States. So we're getting place. We know that, okay, this happens in Chicago, which is in the United States. But here it says Arwen, 34-year-old British elf. That's expanding not just the idea of the otherkin into a group of people, but it's expanding the place. What we're doing, what that says is, hey, look, this doesn't only take place in Chicago and America. This takes place in Great Britain also. It's all of a sudden we're looking at it with a wider lens, uh, in a grander scope. Okay, so think about that too. If you're writing about a group of maybe a group of protesters right now protesting uh, for the reopening of the country. Uh, is that happening also in Italy? Is that happening also? It provide valid information. Don't rely on that as your group, but notice you can expand the scope of place. Very important aspect. Place. Okay, obviously, I should put more emphasis on that word, place. Where do these activities and these people congregate, and what do they do? All right, let's skip ahead here um, to the paragraph near the bottom that begins with, of course, once upon a time, another species was widely believed to have this kind of connectedness, human beings. I want you to read this paragraph and tell me, or think for yourself and tell yourself, whose voice is this now? In my opinion, this is a paragraph of analysis by the writer Nick Mamadis explaining what he thinks of the otherkin. This is, for lack of a better word, his thesis. This is his angle. It's a big chunk of analysis, and it is his voice. It's not dialogue. It's not. It's not just something found. It is his opinion and his subjective analysis that he's trying to get you to see. He's not arguing against a stance. He's not. This is not an argumentative paper, but he's still trying to convince you of his angle. This is almost halfway through the piece, and that's where we find his thesis. So notice there are subjective areas up to you to place your analysis. Do you want to start with scene like a lot of these I've done? Do you want to start with your thesis? Again, all valid. Just make sure it's clear and specific, please. Okay. Again, look at each of these paragraphs and each of your paragraphs and go, I mean, this might be the most important aspect of your revision for this paper. Look at each of your paragraphs and go, whose ideas are these? Is this my idea? Am I analyzing this data, or am I just throwing out a list of data? You don't want to just throw out a list of data, obviously. Then you would just be doing reportage. And we don't want to just report for the news. We want to give our angle and our opinion to show that we have critically thought about this. You'll notice Rich Dansky on the next page, 3 paragraphs down. A human being who worked on the game ran into otherkin through a listserv. So what this is just another character's backstory. So this is, backstory is kind of another word for history, like the history of a group, the way we've seen in other models and in our argumentative papers. But it's kind of the history of a singular character, because Mamadis wants to show here, the writer wants to show here, how these individual characters came into the group, because that shows the similarities or differences in their thinking process. So if we want to know more about a person and why they're in a group, we should look back and say, well, how did you get here? How did you get into this group? Because it says a lot about who they are and who other people in this group may have gotten there. So think about that. There's some important information in the paragraph before. It's just, it says online elves plunder modern pop culture. That's just, again, showing their actions. I'm not going to go into that paragraph more than that. Just make sure you show their action. Well, at the end of that paragraph, it says, but that it also led to a fair number of quote-unquote wannabes deciding they were elves. So that's showing some discontent there. Right now, we get a pretty blatant example of some members of the group disagreeing or having some animosity and calling other members of the group wannabes, even though they both consider themselves part of this singular group, the other kid. That's interesting to me. That's interesting to anybody who's trying to understand about a group is how do they communicate with each other? Do they call each other names, etc., like in this case. Um, um, the anti-modernist sentiment isn't unique to the other kid. That's the beginning of the fourth paragraph on the second page. The 1999 Battle of Seattle saw the anti-diagnostic. Okay, so you can look through something like that. What that's doing is comparing this group and the activities of this group to another group and their activities. If we talk about the protesters wanting to reopen the country right now, could we compare that to another group for clarity? Would comparing that to another group kind of enlighten who might be in this group? Do they have similarities? Did some of them come from that group into this group? So, yes, bringing other groups in for a very short period of time in your paper can add dynamics to your group that you're writing about. Think about that carefully. Um, what about the second to last paragraph, the first sentence that says, the other kin are both sign and portent of a widespread dissatisfaction with the modern world. That sounds awfully a lot like analysis, doesn't it? That sounds like this writer really crystallized his thoughts in that one sentence and said the other kin are both sign and portent of a widespread dissatisfaction with the modern world. And then he uses that paragraph to go on and explain materialist beliefs won't do it anymore, so older ones are dusted off, etc., etc. He's saying what he thinks and why. But then notice how he uses the last paragraph. Sort of like the last model, it focuses on the group in a setting itself and ends on a quote from another kin, which I think this one pulls off better than the last one. A lot of you brought up in the discussion boards how um, it doesn't necessarily, the meaning of the last one, the meaning of the Brony piece didn't exactly come through. Why are, excuse me, why are we reading about the Bronies? What is the point here? I think Mamadis here does a better job at proving his point, and I think he does a better job of ending with a quote here, because it's what it does is it's dialogue from an otherkin that's not just about speaking. It's not just flat out dialogue that's not there for a purpose. It's here to emphasize his point. This dialogue, in this instance, relates and supports the writer's point itself. It says, we have dragons and elves, angelics and satyrs, war creatures and vampires who come together. Discussion gets lively, arguments can get heated, but there is the bond of a community of unique individuals who have one thing in common. We are otherkin. That is not Mamadis's voice, but it is supporting Mamadis's point, which I think is the difference between this piece and the last piece. This one crystallizes its conclusion more understandably. It's almost like he found through interviews an otherkin to make his point, right? Um, that makes it so much more powerful. It adds ethos to his argument because he's saying, well, look, I said this, and so are the other kin. Okay? Dig through here, dig through this model, and I think this might be a pretty effective one to model your papers after. Um, any of these, really. Take what you want and what you feel you need. That's kind of been the point of all of these. All of these models. And I hope that you have found them effective throughout the semester. It kind of makes me sad we can't argue about them in person. In fact, it really makes me sad we can't argue about them in person because that helps. So yeah, ask those. If you want to argue, ask those questions on the discussion board. Get into it on the discussion boards. That's it for this article, this model. But I want to break down some particular aspects of the ethnography before we finish talking about it. Okay? Because this is paper number 3. It is your final paper. It is your last paper before the letter of reflection, which is an entirely different thing. Before I get to what the letter of reflection is, I want to talk about some specific revision ideas for your ethnography, kind of a review or a refresher. I'm going to do this very quickly, so please stick with me in this video. Causality, a word we all know. One thing leads to the next, leads to the next. Please put your paragraphs in causal order, meaning each paragraph's idea logically moves into the next. It's not just a random idea floating in space. It's an idea that goes on to the next. If one paragraph is talking about where they are, the next paragraph might talk about what they do where they are. See how they're related, and one has caused the next idea to happen? It's kind of asking the reader kind of goes, okay, so what do they do there? And then you follow on, and your paragraphs have causal linkage. You'll see in books and in the online textbook, sorry about that. You'll see in online textbooks advice on transitional phrases that might say, and so, and you go into the next idea, therefore, and go into the next idea, because of that, goes into the next idea. The reason for transitional phrases are to transition from one idea to the next. It's to establish that causality. The typical to the global meaning, please remember that. It doesn't change. What are you specifically talking about, and what is the grander point? So in this piece, he's specifically talking about the otherkin and what they do, but in order to make a grander point about subcultures gaining community and how they feel about each other, and what subcultures at large, what subcultures, the whole meaning of subcultures is. Okay? Just because you're talking about otherkin doesn't mean that's all that you mean. Your personal retrospect. This is important to think about. Retrospect, here we are again. What did you think while writing this paper? Or what did you think before you wrote this paper? Did you have biases? Did you come to the table going, man, otherkin are crazy. Bronies are weird. Or I like bronies. There's nothing wrong with that. And did you discover a difference? I am this now because of this. You can put that in your papers. I now believe otherkin are about community, when before I started researching this, I found them to be creepy, whatever, you know? So that is still there. Authority. Now we're thinking about the rhetorical triangle. What gives you the right to talk about otherkin? Emotion. Can you show some pathos? Can you show an otherkin on the floor crying because another otherkin called him a wannabe? That's an emotional appeal. Data, obviously. I showed you in another video how to get on the library database. What data do you have to back up any of your ideas? There's the rhetorical triangle. Hooks. How do your sentences sound? What words do you use? Does it make people want to read on? Hooks can be throughout the paper. Think about your title and your first sentences and your first sentence of each paragraph. These can all be hooks. Structure, it's up to you. I'm not going to give you your structure, but typically you're going to want to start with, there are multiple ways to do it. If you look back at the Bruce Ballinger reading from a couple weeks ago, it will say a day in the life, where you just show the day in the life of a member of a group. You'll see narrative. You can take the form of once they were this, and then they were this, and then this caused them to be this, etc. It can, as long as it contains all of the aspects that are needed, history, character, meaning, angle, etc., it can pretty much be in every structure, or in any structure that feels compelling to you. Narrative involvement. Are you in this paper or are you not? There is a reading that we're not going to discuss that is on the front page of our canvas called Different Sanctuaries by Brian Washington. And it's very short and it's very interesting. It's about the Honduran community in New Orleans, which is a very specific subculture. Okay, the Honduran community in New Orleans and how they kind of have to navigate life in the city with all these factors affecting them. It's really interesting. It's really well written. We've read another piece by Brian Washington earlier, so please give that a look for another uh, structure. I'm sorry, and it also addresses narrative involvement. You will see that the writer of that piece is in that piece. He is a character in that piece. You can be a character in your ethnography. Um, did you go to the Quidditch match on campus? Did you go to the protest at City Hall? You can put I went to the protest and use the first person. You can say I spoke to Jeremy Longjeans who was at the protest, etc. You can be. You have to decide how deep your narrative involvement is. You don't have to say I, you don't have to show involvement in the narrative. Or you can be very present as long as your point gets across that you're talking about a subculture and not just you, your angle and your thesis. It's not an argument. It's just an analysis of why you think this group exists. What is this group? What does this group mean to the world around us right now? What is the relevance? Not what was their relevance in 1982, then it doesn't matter as much. What is their relevance now? What do they contribute to the world around them now? And what does that matter? That is your analysis. If you need to go back to the coin toss video to understand the difference between summary and analysis, do so, because that's where you will find your angle. Voice and tone. Are you angry? Are you excited? Do you really want to show this group? Do you want to write more casually? Do you want to write more academically or serious? It's up to you. Get your point across. Use grammar correctly. We haven't really dug into deep aspects of grammar. You should already have a solid handling of a lot from being in 101 or placing into this class. But big issue, comma usage. Really, just revise for comma usage. It's where most of the problems are. Isolate your independent thoughts uh, and make sure you connect them with conjunctions in the correct way, please. Um, Dialogue, we've talked about it. We've talked about why it should be in an ethnography and every other paper. Don't be afraid to use it. Just don't use giant chunks. Your audience, understand who you're writing to because that affects how you write a paper. Your audience can be anyone. Just make sure you're aware of who you want to write to. Place, we saw that. We saw the importance of place in this last paper. Talked in this last model, Elvin or Otherkin talks about Great Britain, um, etc. America. I'm sorry. I've had a lot of ethnographies done about K-pop fans, Korean pop music, I believe, uh, and so that you can see how that would focus on one place and another place internationally. We see the scope, how it's different over here and how it's different over here. Are protesters in Portland, Oregon, a lot different than protesters in Miami, Florida? Why and for what reason? Place is important. Specificity and vagueness. I've written this on many papers. Examine each sentence. Is it vague or is it specific? If it's vague, you're wasting time and you're wasting the reader's time and you're being incredibly uninteresting. Um, Otherkin are pretty cool, period. That says nothing. It says they're cool, which is another very subjective term. It's not specific. Why? Why are they cool? That's what I want to know as a reader. Um, if you say, if you try to create a thesis in an angle and you say, um, Quidditch players just want to have fun. Okay, maybe that's true, but it's still very vague. How and why do they just want to have fun? Are they escaping something? Are they escaping the real world? Go deeper, okay? Make sure it's not just, I want to have fun. They're cool. This is interesting. They're mad. They're happy. They're sad. Why? What's the relevance? Be specific in every sentence you write, um, because that's what gives writing meaning and importance. Okay, so that was a discussion on the model and a brief recap. And I hope that you will watch this entire thing, because it's not too much to ask, and to go through the review we just did also of terms. Maybe write some of this down, review other videos, look at the textbook, go on the online textbook, etc. Um, After the remember this is due this coming Monday, April 27th by midnight online. The next project will be the letter of reflection. It is incredibly easy and a simple assignment. We usually do it on the day of the final exam in the classroom. We can't do that. So it's just going to be another assignment you turn in online. And I will show you how to do that. It won't take you long. It usually just takes a class period. Uh, but I'll get into the details for that. It's just a reflection back over stuff we've done in the class and how the class was conducted. Um, but there will be a prompt for it posted on Canvas, and I will make another video next week explaining how that works. Okay, please look at the grammar resources in the textbook and uh, the file I put on the front page of Canvas that says 6 basic comma rules. Look at that. Try to make your paper as clean as possible. Put effort in, because that's all I want to see, is effort and a decent understanding of things we've talked about. All the models are there. All the tools are there. Ask me questions online. Ask questions in the discussion board. Okay, guys, we are nearing the end, and I'll have more to talk about that later. It's just a kind of a disappointing thing, but I think a lot of good information is coming through. We'll talk about that later. Just focus on the particulars now. Thank you. Hope you're getting some information through this. Stay safe.